In the class setting this morning, I introduced both lessons with two words that I want everyone to keep in mind as we think today, how that we as Christians think differently and act differently. The first word is in that text of Titus chapter 2, and in verse 14, and I told the class that that word, his own special people, is a Greek word used only one time, and it's in this passage. You and I are special. But as some translations say it, which also is the meaning, you and I are peculiar. I first came here many years ago because my buddy Al invited me. And it was then that I realized how peculiar you people are. Not because Al was here, that's not my point. But as I was driving in on the highway, this is the only place I've ever been that has names for its ditches. I still have not figured out what that's all about. You are peculiar people, but we are peculiar people. The second word is paradox. Luke 5:26 is the only place where that word is used. Literally, the Greek word is paradoxis. So it's a transliterated word, paradox. And it means two apparently conflicting ideas that work together to teach a great lesson. We are peculiar people who live a life of paradox. And in this particular lesson, we are peculiar because we act differently. It is really sad how oftentimes people who are different are pointed out. Oftentimes in grade school, children who are different are bullied. But it continues right on into high school and even into the adult world where we pick out people that are not like us and they're often mistreated. Christians are peculiar people and the world looks at us and they cock their heads and say, you all are strange. And that's okay. Because that's what God has called us to do. So the first lesson about thinking differently then becomes important and connected to the concept of acting different. We better guard our thoughts. We better watch how we think. Because our thoughts become our words. Our words become our actions. Our actions become our habits. Our habits become our character. And our character determines our destiny. We better watch how we think, because not only does how we think influence how we act, but eventually it leads to the destiny, the eternal destiny of our souls. We are people who act differently. We're just not like everybody else. We don't think that way. We certainly don't act that way, or at least It's not our intention to think and act like they do, even though at times we fail. But we claim to be a part of a group of people who in fact act differently. Let's think together for a few minutes about a few ways that Christians are peculiar and act in paradoxical ways. Let me give you a few of these and consider them with me together. The first one is found in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18. If you want to go to that passage and notice what Paul says to us. We are people who live in this paradoxical way because, one, we look for things we cannot see. And that doesn't make sense. We act differently because we are constantly looking for things that we cannot see. Look, starting in verse 16, we do not lose heart. Even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far exceeding and eternal weight of glory, while we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things that are seen are temporal. The things that are not seen are eternal. We are people who are constantly looking for something that we cannot see. It is the great baffle of people to wonder how it is we can believe in a God whom we cannot see. And if you ask people, and I will ask you and give you a chance in your mind to answer first, how many senses are there in this world? How many senses do we have? You put a number in your head, and I'm going to tell you you're probably wrong, unless you've heard before. We can see, we can taste, we can touch, we can see, we can feel. 5. No, there are 6. Reason is our 6th sense. For there are so many things that I absolutely know to be true in this world that I cannot, with 5 senses, prove. And yet I believe them. And I know that they are true. God is exactly the same way. I don't know if it's over here, but there's an interesting radio commercial over in Kentucky. It may just be a Kentucky financial manager. He is in Lexington, but I don't know how widespread he is. But he's a very religious man. And in many of his commercials, he references things of a religious nature. And he says, we do things by faith. And faith is accepting what is not apparent. He said, our country was built on faith. They accepted who they could be, but it was not apparent that they could be. That's what Paul is saying. We live by faith. For without faith, it is impossible to please God. Hebrews 11 and verse 6. So that we are people by faith who live constantly looking for something we cannot see. And that sounds strange. But that's exactly how God expects us to live. Because the things that we see are temporary. And they will be gone, whereas the things that we do not see, they will last. Number 2, we are people who act differently because we play to lose so that we can be called a winner. You know what bothers me? One of the things that bothers me in this life, playing a game or a sport or something against someone who does not care if they win or lose. That drives me insane. Why play? I've always said if you're going to play something and it's a competitive thing, then if you're not trying to win, why are you playing? My kids, I didn't let them win. Now they beat me all the time. They're just paying me back. I'm a very competitive person. I really am. And when I had a chance on Friday morning to beat my son on the golf course, I was all in. I missed the 8-foot putt, and we tied, and I was not happy. I don't play anything to lose. And I don't imagine that many of you do either. But I know this, if you're a Christian, you do. Whoever loses his life will find it. And whoever finds his life will lose it. Matthew 10 and verse 39. And in Matthew 20 and verse 16, he said, the first will be last, and the last first. We're running for last place. We're playing to lose. We just act differently than everybody else. It's a competition to see if we can lose here. Because I know and we know that if we have the mentality that Jesus wants us to have, we lose so that we can win. Number 3 in Romans chapter 6, starting at around verse 16. We find that we act differently because we sign up to be a slave so that we really can be free. Do you not know that to whom you present yourselves as slaves to obey, that one's slaves you are whom you obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness. But God be thanked that though you once were slaves of sin, yet you have now become slaves of righteousness to the doctrine to which you were delivered. What, Paul? You're exchanging this type of slavery for this type. There are many people in the world who just can't stand for somebody else to tell them what to do. They just have a real problem with authority. But I have news for them, and you know what it is. You're never going to be in a situation your entire life where you are totally free from anybody telling you what to do. Oh, I remember the day I got to go to Freed Hardeman. It was the greatest thing in my life. I thought. I had worked for my dad for years. Now I'm going off to college. And after we unloaded and put all my stuff in my room, I looked across and said, the greatest thing I'm ever going to see is the taillights of your car. Mom cried. I wanted out. I could eat where I wanted to. Not on that couch. Oh yeah, I can now. Anytime I want to. What I want to. But then I realize I'm in a dorm and they tell me what to do. You're never free from someone telling you what to do. It's just a matter of saying, to whom will I be enslaved? To these who offer me nothing? Or to God who offers me everything? We are different. We act different because we sign up to be in slavery because we know that's the true meaning of freedom. Number 4 is found in Matthew chapter 11, starting in verse 28. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke on you and learn from me, for I am meek and lowly in heart. You'll find rest to your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. We are different people because we seek to carry a burden in order to lighten our load. Now that is a paradox. Notice what Jesus said. He called to him those who already had a burden. Come to me, all you who are burdened, and take my yoke and my burden. The story is told of a man leading or driving his horse and his wagon. And as he was riding along, there was a man, a poor man, with everything he owned apparently on his back. And he offered him a ride. And the man crawled up into the wagon and he sat there. And a little while down the road, the driver of the wagon noticed that his pack with everything that he had was still on his back. And he said, "Sir, why don't you rest and set the burden aside?" "Oh no, you've been so kind. I wouldn't want you to carry my burden too." Isn't that how we look at Jesus sometimes? He says, set your burden aside and take mine. And in doing so, you will find that it's lighter. Does he take the burden away? No. We still have pain and trial and suffering and difficulty. But we set it on him, and in his yoke and within his burden, he carries us. And now, even with the same burdens, the same loads, the same trials, we feel lighter. That's just how we act differently. Number 4 is found in Matthew chapter 5, verses 11 and 12. We work here for a reward that is not here. Jesus said, "Blessed are you when they revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake." We are people who work here and are abused here, not receiving reward here all of the time. And it makes no sense. It makes no sense to work and not receive an immediate reward. We are a society totally dedicated to the immediacy of a reward. How long are you willing to sit in a drive-through line at a restaurant waiting to get your order in? How long? I don't know. But sometimes it's a little too long, isn't it? We like this immediacy, and the world thinks exactly that way. And so the work that they're doing, if they don't get an immediate benefit, it's not for them. You and I, in the Christian life, understand that the benefit is down the road, not always right here. We find in number 6 in Romans 6. We act differently because we choose to die so that we can live. What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Certainly not. How shall we who have died to sin live any longer in it? Therefore we were buried by baptism into His death. Just as Christ was raised from the dead, we also should walk in newness of life. We choose to die so that we can live. It is the death to the world. It is the death that says, I'm no longer bound and committed to the things of this world, and I've taken on a new existence, a new life. That's what baptism does. I don't know that everybody understands it fully all of the time. It is not possible for a 12 and 13 and 14-year-old child to know all of the ramifications of dying to sin and living to God. But it's not possible for this 62-year-old guy to understand all the ramifications of what it means to die to sin and live to God. But both of us can understand that when Jesus said we are baptized into His death and raised to a new life just like He was, I get that. And there's a dawning, continuing recognition of learning and growing and understanding. We are different people. We just act differently. Yes, we are peculiar. And we live a paradoxical life. The life we live is so different. The author Francis Schaeffer wrote a number of things in an apologetic way. He wrote one book entitled, "The God Who Is There," made this statement: one of the greatest tragedies that we teach our young people is for them to be conservative. Christianity is not about conservatism. Christianity is about a revolution. And he says we need to teach our people to be revolutionaries, not just conservative. Because the revolution rejects the thinking of this world and the actions of this world to be different, to be peculiar, and to live the paradox. In closing, I've experienced the potential negative paradox. It's a story I often tell, and if I've told you, some I'm sure haven't heard it. I'm going to tell it again. It's a real-life negative paradox. In the late 90s, a young man came from Hayden, Kentucky to Eastern Kentucky University. Member of the church, great musician, became one of our song leaders. 2 or 3 years in, his parents invited me to come to that area and speak on their Saturday lectureship. Back before GPS, they sent me this message and told me how to find the place. And they gave me all these turns and things to make down the mountain parkway and said, now when you get to this particular place, you turn right. And there's a big billboard in the side of the mountain, and it'll give you these directions. Go to the first traffic light and turn left to the Hertz Creek Church of Christ. I was glad to see the sign. I had made it. And I went to the first traffic light and I turned left, and I'm driving and driving and driving and driving. There's a little store. I stopped and walked in. The way I walked in must have got his attention. You're lost, aren't you? I said, yes, sir, I am. Do you know the place where you are? No, sir, I don't. You are in hell for certain. What? That's not a nice thing to say. That's the name of their town. It is called Hell for Certain, Kentucky. That's just a fact. Hell for Certain, Kentucky. I was doing flood relief work a couple of weeks ago, and there's a place down there called Hellier. I-E-R. So there's Hell for Certain and Hellier. I don't want to go to either one. But I told him what I was doing. He said, I know where the Hertz Creek Church of Christ is. You go to the second light and turn right. Oh. By that time, I was almost late. And I got up into the pulpit and I said, people, there's something wrong with you. I came down here and you told me to go to the first traffic light and turn left. There's nothing happening in Hayden, Kentucky. Did you not remember when they put the second traffic light in? Didn't you know it was probably a party day, wasn't it? Because there was some action. And so now I'm speaking in front of the Hertz Creek Church of Christ, who are directing people to hell for certain. And as true as that story is, it's sad. Because sometimes there are Christian people who think and act not differently from the world while claiming to be Christians. And they, unwittingly, are directing people to hell for certain. Today, be proud to be peculiar. Be proud to live a paradoxical life. Be proud that you don't think or act like everybody else. Because this life is the only real life. This certainly is what a Christian is. Today, if you're not a child of God, will you not die to live, being immersed into Jesus Christ? Will you not choose the life of slavery to Him so that you can be free? This call is for any who need while we stand and sing together.